start?
No. We need other people also to join. We are waiting. Yes. So far, let's see.
Yeah.
Yeah, already 70 people have joined as attendees. So it's good. So I think, Shubham, if no one else is like joining as panelists, I think we can start. We already have more than 70 people.
Yes, sir. Midul, we are live now?
We are live at YouTube also, sir.
Okay.
Okay.
Good to go now.
Good.
Good to go.
Okay, so Madam, you have to start like recording, and then Divya can like begin. Have you started the recording? Okay, the recording has started. Divya, you can start.
A very warm good afternoon to everyone. I, Divya Tiwari, on behalf of the Center for Constitutional Law and Governance at Rajiv Gandhi National University of Law, cordially welcome all to the session on implications of the fall of national government in Afghanistan. The Center for Constitutional Law and Governance at Rajiv Gandhi National University of Law is a research center established with a vision to contribute to the analysis, academic research, and understanding of constitutional law and governance from an interdisciplinary prism. Keeping in view the need and importance of innovative perspectives, the Center adopts a transdisciplinary approach to understand constitutionalism and governance under the ever-widening framework of laws. In the past, we have organized a number of webinars, online seminars, and the flagship event of paper presentation competition. Without any further delay, I now take the opportunity to introduce our audience to our eminent speaker of today's session. Honorable Professor Dr. Manish is currently the Dean of the School of International Studies. He is also the Chairperson and Professor of the Center for International Politics at Central University of Gujarat. Sir has earlier served as a fellow from 2001 to 2005 at the prestigious defense think tank, the Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, and also as an officer on special duty from 2005 and 2012 in Government of India. Moreover, from 2012 to 2017, Sir was the head of the newly set up Department of International Relations at the Sikkim University. He was also instrumental in setting up Maulana Azad Center for Northeast Studies at the Sikkim University. The center has published a well-regarded magazine named Bodhi under his esteemed editorship. Now, I humbly request our respected political science professor, Mr. Saurav, to take over the floor.
Thank you, Divya. It's a great pleasure to have Manish sir among us. He's one of the leading foreign policy thinkers of India. And this is a very pertinent topic in the news every day. And things are happening very fast in Afghanistan. All of us saw on the 15th of August how Kabul fell so quickly without any resistance to the Taliban. And the president escaped the country. And the only resistance now is coming from the Panjshir Valley. And there also the news is not very good. And yesterday there was a lot of things happening, a lot of commanders being killed. And Amrullah Saleh, who was the acting president of the previous government. And so his home was also bombed and he's now gone into an undisclosed location. And so it's fortunate for us that Sir is here to explain to us the events of how the situation got to this, beginning with in the 90s, how the Taliban was there and the American forces, overthrew the Taliban after 9/11 and 20 years of American-led government there. And what happened and why did America leave? And all these questions, we need answers to those. And Sir would probably give us all the answers. And after he makes the presentation, then we are going to take questions from the audience. Before that, I would also like to mention briefly about the latest book that Sir has written on Belt and Road Initiative. So it's an excellent work. We have already shared and circulated the poster of the book. Sir, do you have the book with you right now? Yeah, so this is the book.
Can you see?
Yeah. Yes, sir. We can see the book. So this is about China's initiative of building infrastructure and building links with different neighboring countries and extending Chinese power abroad. And how does this affect India? Okay, so you can see the poster we have shared on the screen. So this is the book. So I'd request everyone to look into the book and see if you can like find it interesting. Okay, so sir, let's start. So you can start.
Yeah,
with
please.
your
Yeah.
presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saurabh Sharma, for this. Am I audible? Clear?
Yes, sir. Yes.
And my young colleague Divya for that wonderful introduction. As Dr. Saurabh mentioned, it's a very interesting theme. And why I say it's an interesting theme, because it's also very contemporary. But more importantly, it has serious implications for Indian foreign policy and security policy as well. When we were discussing this with Dr. Sharma, I said I'm not a lawyer, but I can give you a sort of a perspective of what actually happened in Afghanistan historically. Who are Taliban? Who are the creators of Taliban? And what exactly is the strategic fallout of this government, which obviously has implications for India's security. So broadly, I'll structure my lecture today around these themes. It's not going to be sort of a very structured sort of a lecture, but and why it's not structured, because the type of events and the developments which are happening in Afghanistan, any lecture for that matter can only be tentative. So I'll start with, and as all of you have seen for the last, from starting say August 15th, the world is yet to fully recover from the shock of how quickly the Ghani regime collapsed. There was an accord signed between the Taliban and the United States for the withdrawal of US troops from Afghanistan. But no one actually imagined as to how quickly it can happen. And as the US and the international forces continued their evacuations, and many Afghans struggled to leave the Western countries, the formation of the new government in Kabul has also picked up a pace. The Taliban have been consulting all stakeholders to form a government that has a broad support of section of Afghan population. One they say will be inclusive and Islamic, right? However, what we have seen in the past is what Taliban is saying and what we see on ground. There is a huge gap between what is being said and what happens on ground. Yet, Taliban has promised a government which is within inverted inclusive and Islam. But what that will actually mean or look like in practice is still unclear. Now, the Taliban have also announced a sort of a general amnesty for all civil servants and pledged to ensure safety for residents of Kabul. The pictures which are coming are very different. There are indications on surface that point to the intention to institute a governing mechanism that would uphold basic human rights. But what we see today, the world remains deeply skeptical of Taliban, and their intentions will mean little unless they are backed by action on the ground. Now, what we have seen, the reports which are coming, is Taliban excesses against the Hazara community. I'll come to it. Taliban is not a very homogeneous, sorry, Afghanistan is not a very homogeneous society. Hazaras are basically the long persecuted Shia minority in the Sunni majority of Afghanistan, as well as of Taliban fighters. The Talibans are primarily Sunni majority. They are going door to hunt them down. Those who have worked with the Ghani regime. So this is what we have seen in the past few days. The early signs, therefore, are concerning, and the Taliban promises about inclusivity will be tested over the next few weeks. Now, given the Taliban's worldview, it should be a huge challenge for them to adjust their ideology to the imperatives of inclusiveness. They are talking about publicly. They are talking about women's rights. They are talking about rights of minorities. But the type of ideology which they want to implement on ground is something, there is a disconnect. And therefore, how inclusive will be the government is something which still remains to be tested. But to me, the most immediate concern relates to the presence of terrorist networks in Afghanistan. Just a few days back, you saw a bombing at the airport. The Taliban's political ascendance actually poses a huge counter-terrorism challenge, as globally oriented terror groups such as Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Daesh could create a favorable environment in a Taliban-led Afghanistan. And obviously, some of these organizations are likely to step up their activities. While the Taliban had pledged to cut their links with Al-Qaeda as part of now discredited deal with the United States, there is hardly any evidence on ground of their willingness to honor their word. And Al-Qaeda, incidentally, has praised Taliban for their victory. So these are some of the facts which we'll have to keep in mind. Another major worry which I just mentioned is the human rights violation under the Taliban regime. Though the Taliban are trying to reassure the world that the rights of women and minorities will be protected, there are serious doubts about the Sharia compliant regime they intend to install. So this is going to be one of the major challenges. I mean, I have some students from Afghanistan here in my university. I have spoken to many of them. And there is a serious concern amongst the Afghanis themselves and Afghani women. There is no clarity as to what the Taliban mean when they say that women will be allowed to work and study within the framework of Islam. There is absolutely no clarity on this. And therefore, there is a real fear of a return to public beheadings, which we had witnessed in Taliban one regime, amputations, stoning of criminals, so on and so forth, and women in burqas. So I think there is going to be a serious challenge here. The idea of an Afghan state, which is built on an Islamic order as defined by Taliban, indeed contradicts the very concept of liberal democracy. And it therefore remains to be seen how the Taliban will negotiate with the international community on the issues of human rights and terror networks. opposition to electoral democracy has lent credence to concerns over their resolve to impose a sort of a repressive theocracy. Please understand this. Therefore, how will the Taliban accommodate different political and ethnic stakeholders without holding a sort of a multi-party elections? They need to prove that this time around they will not preside over the dictatorship. I'm talking about Taliban too. Afghanistan, which is predominantly mountainous with plains in the north and southwest, is inhabited by 31.4 million people. And this is 2020 data, composed mostly of Pashtuns, Tajiks, Hazaras, and Uzbeks. So, in a sense, it's a very, very multi-ethnic society. And the type of polity which actually Taliban is trying to impose is something, to my understanding, I don't understand how they are going to be inclusive in terms of the formation of governments. Now, there is a long history of Afghanistan which actually dates back to the Middle Era. Given its strategic location, Afghanistan has always been part of what you call the Silk Road. And it's this Silk Road which connected Afghanistan to cultures of Middle East and other parts of Asia and so on. It is also a land, please understand, it's also a land which has historically been the home and witnessed numerous military campaigns, including those of Alexander, Mauryas, Muslim Arabs, Mongols, Brits, the Soviets, the British, the United States, and the NATO allied countries. And it has been called unconquerable, and indeed it was also nicknamed the graveyard of empires. So this is the type of history of Afghanistan. The modern state of Afghanistan, which began with the Hotak and the Durrani dynasties in the 18th century. In the 19th century, Afghanistan became a buffer state during what I'm sure Saurabh must have taught about the great game between British India and the Russian Empire. Afghanistan was very much part of British India's ring fence policy at that point of time. Following the Third Anglo-Afghan War in 1919, the country became free of foreign dominance, eventually became Kingdom of Afghanistan in 1926 under King Amarullah. The kingdom lasted almost 50 years until King Zahir was overthrown and the republic was established in 1973. In 1978, there was a second coup. Afghanistan became a socialist state, which provoked a sort of a Soviet Afghan war in the 80s against the Mujahideen rebels. By 1996, most of Afghanistan was captured by Islamic fundamentalist group, the Taliban, Taliban 1, which we call. And it was this Taliban which ruled most of the country as a totalitarian regime for over 5 years. The Taliban was removed from power after US invasion in 2001, but still controlled a sort of a significant portion of the country. And the 20-year-long war between the government and the Taliban reached its climax with 2021 Taliban offensive, resulting fall of Kabul, which returned the Taliban to power. So this is a sort of a brief history of Afghanistan. Now, having said that, there is a history of Taliban as well. Who are these Taliban? We also need to understand as to where these Taliban come from. And given the geostrategic location of Afghanistan, the great game which I mentioned, the British power and the Russian power, and subsequently the Soviet invasion, followed by the US and Pakistan ousting the Soviets, I think there is a history of Mujahideens in this region. Today, actually, the Taliban controls roughly 85% of Afghanistan. But as I said, it was after the end of the Afghan-Soviet war, different Afghan tribal leaders began fighting amongst themselves for the control of the nation. Afghanistan, as I said, is a multi-ethnic, sectarian, and basically on tribal lines also divided. The Taliban militia emerged from the civil war. Its members have studied an extremely conservative version of Islam extensively and had previously fought as Mujahideen. Now, it's very interesting to know as to what has been the Pakistani role, Pakistan's role in the creation of this Taliban. And why did Pakistan create Taliban? After all, we all know Taliban is primarily a baby of Pakistan. And if you go back into history, the Taliban, which is basically students in Pashto, what you call, are Pashtun Sunni Islamists. They were funded by Saudi Arabia, who came in news in the early 90s in northern areas of Pakistan after the Soviet troop withdrawal from Afghanistan to restore peace in the Pashtun. Now, politically, it was the creation of then Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto. I'm talking of Pakistan Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto and his Interior Minister Nasirullah Babar, along with the ISI. We tend to forget the role of Hamid Gul. Hamid Gul was one of the very active members of ISI, who was deeply involved in the creation, training, and pushing the Afghan militia, Taliban militia into Afghanistan. You should be asking me a question as to why did Pakistan do this? After the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan, wherein ISI along with CIA was fighting a covert war against the Soviets. Please remember, this is the period of the Cold War. Afghanistan, as I said, was a virgin area. I also gave you that there were tribal leaders who were actually wanting power in Afghanistan. And that was the opportunity for Pakistan. Pakistan wanted to seek strategic depth vis-a-vis India. And therefore, it wanted Afghanistan and the Taliban government, which possibly can work at the behest of Pakistan. That was the idea of Pakistan in the creation of Taliban. There were a lot of madrasas which were created on Pak-Afghanistan border. In Baluchistan province, in NWFP province, in Baluchistan, there is a district called Qila Abdullah, Chaman. These Taliban were primarily trained there and then infiltrated into Afghanistan. And after Mullah Omar had his Taliban government in Afghanistan, it was then that Osama bin Laden, at that point of time, who had taken refuge in Karachi, moved into Afghanistan, and that was the time when Al-Qaeda had planned 9/11. So Pakistan's role is very, very important. We cannot undermine the role of Pakistan in the creation of Taliban. If I take you back to Taliban 1 era, the type of government which Taliban had run, they wanted men to grow their beards. Women had to wear the all-covering hijab. The television was banned. Music, cinema was banned. Girls under the age of 10 and above going to schools was a human rights violation. And you must have also heard about the famous Banyan Buddha, which was in central Afghanistan, which was destroyed despite the international outcry by Taliban. This is the type of regime of Taliban 1. Now, despite the fact that Pakistan outrightly denies supporting of Taliban, but it's a universal fact that Pakistan was running madrasas to train Afghanistan Taliban elements within Pakistan and was amongst the first of the 3 countries. The other 2 were Saudi Arabia and UAE, to accord recognition when they took power by force in 2001 after the Soviet pullback. So Pakistan has an important role. Let me also share this, that while Taliban was operating in Afghanistan, many of the militant groups which you hear fighting in Kashmir, Lashkar-e-Toiba, right? They were all created in Afghanistan, in Kunar province of Afghanistan. I'm sure all of you must have heard about the IC Air India hijack, the plane which was hijacked from Nepal and then eventually moved to Afghanistan. That was the time when Taliban was there. It was the Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee and his government who had to literally go and negotiate with the Taliban for the release of the prisoners. And what did they ask for? The release of Maulana Masood Azhar, who was in Jammu jail at that point of time. After his release in Afghanistan, Masood Azhar drove into Pakistan, and at Binori Mosque 2001, he announced the creation of Jaish-e-Mohammed, the militant organization. And after that, you have seen how Jaish-e-Mohammed was active in the Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir. So there is a very clear-cut linkages here. Now, let me take you back to 9/11 attacks in the US. The Taliban were accused of providing sanctuary to Osama bin Laden. Indeed, not accused, they had provided sanctuary to Osama bin Laden. There were leaders, Taliban leaders like Hakimullah Masood, Mullah Mansour, who were actually killed in US drone attacks. Akhundzada, many of them were they were put in Pakistani jails. So this is basically the history of Taliban 1. Sorry. And the role which Pakistan was playing. Now, the Taliban seizing the initiative captured rapidly the entire Afghanistan just in 2 weeks. Now, toppling the government in an almost bloodless coup and forcing the President Ghani to escape out of Afghanistan. is something which is amazing. Now, there are media reports suggesting that Taliban were moving on a massive picnic, capturing towns after towns without any resistance by the 3.5 lakh strong, well-trained Afghan National Army. This is also a fact. There are people who actually feel that as per the secret deal arrived amongst all stakeholders in Doha, where at the behest of Pakistan, the Taliban waited for a day outside Kabul, letting Afghan officials to escape. The US Marine taking over Kabul airport and the US vacating their embassy staff as if everything was worked out in detail. So there are a lot of suspicions about the US role also. What was there a deal? By the way, India was not part of this Doha agreement, despite the fact that India has invested a lot of soft power in Afghanistan. The Salma Dam, the parliament, the infrastructure which has come up in terms of training. And let me also share this with you guys that India actually deserves a lot of respect amongst the normal Afghani citizens. You talk to them, Indian films are very popular. Television serials are very popular. They trust Indians. So this is the amount of soft power which India exerts. And yet India was not part of any of these Doha agreements. And therefore, there are people who will obviously raise doubts whether it was a secret deal arrived among all stakeholders at Doha. Now, the Taliban is in possession of some of the best and the most dangerous weapons, equipments, guns, rockets, armed helicopters, tanks, and aircrafts worth US $20 billion. Now, the pictures may suggest a contrary thing that these helicopters may have been deactivated, but we have also seen the Taliban flying at those helicopters in Kabul. So this is the scenario which is emerging. The US, Taliban, China, and the Russians have been aware of all such deals which have been brokered through Pakistan, acting as a leading arbiter. Since Pakistan has been providing training, money through Saudi Arabia, safe havens, arms and ammunitions, and real-time actionable intelligence about the US and the allied troops to Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and other networks like the Haqqani network, which were actually fighting in Afghanistan. Right. So Pakistan becomes an important player then. Therefore, Pakistan, both countries have now, Pakistan and Afghanistan have become a troublesome neighbor. Right. This is something which we will have to keep in mind. Pakistan, by its very negative tactics and diplomacy, has ensured that Taliban gets significant role in forming government in Afghanistan. Please understand, who is the one who controls the Kabul airport today? It's the Haqqani network. And who controls the Haqqani network? It's the ISI. Right. Now, what does it mean for Pakistan, the new government? For the first time in the 2 decades, Kabul will have an unambiguously pro-Pakistan regime. We have to be absolutely clear, which will effectively eliminate Pakistani fear of an Indian threat in Afghanistan. Every time ISI and Taliban used to target Indian assets in Afghanistan, our embassy was targeted. We lost one of our diplomats there, very promising diplomat. Now, Pakistan is unambiguously clear that the regime is going to be a pro-Pakistani regime and there will be no threat from India. The world has rightly come to the view that Taliban's victory is primarily a win for Pakistan, as it represents a sort of vindication of Taliban's long-held Afghan policy. The Taliban would be willing to work with many infrastructure projects linking Afghanistan closely with Pakistan. Now, Pakistan's conservative Islamic scholars and religious extremists will particularly be elated by Taliban's announcement of a creation of a what you call the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. We have started hearing this. But whatever the ultimate makeup of the Taliban regime, it is Pakistan that will receive ideological inspiration from Afghanistan. And this could result in further Talibanization of the country through Pakistan's religious institutions and political parties. Don't undermine this. There are many Pakistanis who fear that Taliban regime in Kabul would inspire the Pakistani Taliban to accelerate a war against the Pakistani state. An ideologically radical Taliban would also make it difficult for Pakistan to disentangle itself should there be a sort of a regional conflict breakout. And therefore, if your neighborhood is in turmoil, then I think we will have to be very, very careful and keep watchful of the developments in your neighborhood, whether it be in Afghanistan or its implications in Pakistan. Now, the second thing, which we have also seen, is equally dangerous. We have seen protests and opposition in Afghanistan against the Taliban. There are in many parts, and I was just doing some detailing of some of this. Asadabad, Jalalabad, right? These were the areas wherein you have seen some Afghans who have taken to streets against the Taliban. The Northern Alliance, which was led by Ahmad Massoud, the so-called lion of the Panjshir Valley, which is now giving resistance to Taliban, not only refused to compromise with the Taliban, but also mobilized global opinion against them. Right. So this is also a very equally disturbing fact, that possibly if there is a resistance, possibly Afghanistan may fall into a sort of a civil war, and which would lead to a greater instability in Afghanistan. Now, what Taliban today has promised, Taliban 2, is that they are likely to behave differently from their previous version under Mullah Omar. And the primary reason for the rapid defeat of Ghani regime was the Taliban's ability to combine deft diplomacy with military force. The Taliban too is negotiating with the rest of the world, sitting in Doha. So that's a difference. But as I said, despite their public claims to support inclusiveness, the Taliban too seems to be a repressive interpretation of Islam, which what we have witnessed. And therefore, if you ask me, I don't see much of a hope Now, let me now come to part 2 of this story, which is the geopolitics. And what does the US retreat, Taliban return means to this geostrategic configuration of this region? Now, the Taliban withdrawal has led Afghanistan in chaos, and there are various intelligence agencies, including the Israeli, the British, assess that the geopolitical games are being played. The United States and Europe are worried that China and Russia will control Afghanistan. China always wanted to. As part of its Belt and Road, China always had an eye on Afghanistan. And therefore, despite the fact that China had crafted 6 corridors, one which actually concerned us was the China-Pakistan economic corridor, which connected Xinjiang to Gwadar province. But China wanted this CPEC to be extended into Afghanistan. I have written on this subject, I think 2 years back, that this is going to be a much more dangerous proposition, because on the other hand, China wants to extract the minerals. It's the ISI which would control the Taliban. So China indeed was using ISI in Pakistan to enter into Afghanistan. Now China has a free hand. China can go either through Pakistan. China and Taliban can directly negotiate. This is even more favorable to the statements which are coming from Taliban. Clearly says that they want China to invest in Afghanistan. Afghanistan otherwise is a mineral rich country. The amount of silver which and there are resources, mineral resources, which could actually contribute to critical technologies which are important to China's missile and space programs. So China is eyeing. So there is this fear that People's Republic of China and supported by Russia would control Afghanistan. And since the Taliban took over Kabul, the Western public has begun to maintain that PRC, People's Republic of China, and Russia would benefit from the US disastrous failure. Why I say disastrous failure? Because public opinion, if you sift through the media reports in US, people are not happy with what Biden did. And the way the Americans pulled out their army from Afghanistan. Now, as part of the Russia-China-US troika on Afghanistan, now Beijing has moved swiftly to say that it's willing to support friendly nations with the new Taliban. Russia is a bit more circumspect, is biding its time to see how the regime will behave, but China has come up very clearly. And the Prime Minister of the 4th additional member of this troika, that is Pakistan, has already welcomed the entry of Taliban into Kabul as the end of US slavery in Afghanistan. Now, none of them, neither China nor Pakistan, bode well for India, for which it seems that there are more things to change. The more they stay the same. Now, it may be, say, the chaos in Afghanistan, it leaves in the wake, which makes India even more vulnerable than ever. And if anything, the visuals of, please don't forget the visuals of the 3 terrorists, Jaish-e-Mohammed leader Masood Azhar, Lashkar's Omar Sheikh and Kashmir's Mushtaq Sarwar, which were driven back to Kandahar airport, where the aircraft had been parked in Taliban custody, escorted by land cruisers across the border of Pakistan. So don't forget the images. Nothing has changed for India. This was 20 years ago. Right. So coming to my last section, which is what is the rebirth of Taliban's Islamic Emirate going to mean for India? And in short, the fallout probably would be huge. Even though India's borders on the map extend to Afghanistan, Pak-occupied Kashmir, in fact, lies in between the two countries, which provides something of a geographical cushion. In recent years, Pakistan has scaled back cross-border infiltration by terrorist groups, not because of Afghanistan, but because it fears war, which its economy is ill-poised to face. As long as Pakistan keeps the jihad tap shut, things in Kashmir will stable. But the future isn't quite so certain. Please remember that. So Taliban's ascendancy in Afghanistan is actually going to boost Pakistan's morale. Now, successive UN reports also have said that groups like Jaish and Lashkar are operating alongside with Taliban. These are the reports which are coming from United Nations. In the future, these groups can expand their training facilities and bases in Afghanistan, which means they can expand their lethality and reach. And don't forget the Haqqani network. The Taliban, despite promises, also continues to harbor Al-Qaeda. Its main fighting arm, the Haqqani network, has close links with the wing of the Islamic State, which has trained Indian nationals and even used them for suicide attacks. So, to conclude, will the rise of Taliban destabilize the region? I think the Taliban's fighting forces in northern Afghanistan, including Uzbek and Tajik nations, who had been involved in Islamist insurgencies in Central Asia. The Taliban has ties with jihadists in Xinjiang province of China. It also includes within its ranks large number of jihadists which are of anti-Shia belief. And to make things worse, the Taliban has close links with narcotic traffickers and other criminal cartels. And this is why Pakistan also needs to worry if they want to think seriously about it. Nonetheless, the regional powers, Iran, Russia, China, Pakistan, embraced with Taliban with a common goal of evicting United States from the region and securing their interest. I'm not sure as to how stable this region would be. You may have met an objective, but I think there are new challenges in terms of non-amorphous entities emerging. Does India have a role to play? I think India has invested, as I said, roughly $2 billion in aid in Afghanistan. No great amount, it's true, compared to over $2 trillion which United States has invested. Now, but for now, given the politics and the strategic configuration which is emerging in the region, New Delhi is isolated. in the build-up to 9/11, India funded the anti-Taliban Northern Alliance, but could only do because it had an alliance with Iran and Russia at that time. Today, those countries are on the other side. Please remember this. Even then, India failed to stop the victory of Taliban. Only 9/11 did that. Therefore, for New Delhi, the wisest course of action might be to sit on the sidelines, watch the match until the opportunity presents itself. I think that's the only option which is left at this point of time. I think as situation arises, things might change, right? You can always engage with in talks. I mean, obviously we have interests out there, but it's better to wait and watch. And this is what I heard say many of the diplomats, retired diplomats who come on various TV channels have also feel so. So I think the New Delhi's wisest course of action should be to sit on the sidelines, watch the match until the opportunity presents itself. I'll stop here and I'll be very happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for a comprehensive presentation. Sir has covered the recent events that have happened in Afghanistan. Then he went into the history of Afghanistan and how this conflict evolved. He also went into the history of Taliban, how it was created and how there was Taliban 1 and how Taliban 2 has emerged. He also talked about the implication on the neighboring countries, the roles of Russia, China, Iran, and especially Pakistan. And then finally, sir looked into the situation of India and what India can do in the current context. So now I would request the participants to ask questions. So some of you who would like to speak, you can raise your hands. I'll unmute you. And then you can ask your questions. The participants, some of our faculty members are there in the panel. So you can unmute yourself and ask questions. Besides someone who doesn't want to speak, you may write your question in the chat box. I'll read out your question. Okay, first I would like to ask something to sir. I don't understand one thing. What was the necessity? And this has been asked by many commentators in America also. What was the necessity for America to withdraw completely from Afghanistan? Over the last 2 years, there had been hardly any American casualties. Afghan army was taking the brunt of the casualties, and a minimal number of troops, which was keeping the morale of the Afghan government. It was maintaining a balance there. And what was the necessity for withdrawing?
Can I?
Yes.
I mean, it's a very tricky question in the sense that the answer possibly would be more in a speculative realm. See, when it comes to conflict zones, Americans are always worried about the body bags, unlike the British, right? Whether be Vietnam or Afghanistan, right? Any American casualty actually blows in the domestic constituency, right? Political parties are also very sensitive to this, and while it is Biden today, it was the Trump when these negotiations had started. So there was a lot of pressure within the domestic constituency as to what is the necessity for an American engagement now that the core objective of Osama bin Laden has been addressed. So that was one which was issue which was part of the US domestic debate. The second major issue was the economy. Obviously, it was one of the major issues, wherein there was a lot of pressure. I mean, the Americans also are not as rich as they used to be. And for the last 1.5 years, if you see, there's a lot of internal debt which is gone. So I think that possibly could also have been one of the factors for the US withdrawal. So I think all these factors taken together, possibly the Trump administration may have decided to negotiate. The Taliban diplomacy is better today, so possibly they have been able to say convince the Americans in their wisdom. And that is precisely why I said the American exit was planned. It was not just something which happened, but it flows from the negotiations which were happening between the Americans and the Taliban. But my own sense is that there was a lot of domestic pressure. Yeah, the domestic public opinion did not realize as to what would be the consequences, because what the Taliban was saying was not actually the situation of ground. But I think it's now for the Americans to decide for themselves whether it's a right decision or a wrong decision. Biden actually is trying to defend its decision. Very vociferously.
Thank you, sir. So there are a lot of questions. A lot of people want to ask questions. So please be patient. We are going to take all the questions.
So what I can do is maybe you can club some of the questions and then I can answer, because.
Okay. So first I request the people in the panel, they can, maybe sir, you can take 2-3 questions, let them ask the questions and then you can take them together. Yeah, so from the panel.
So can I please ask a question?
Yes, please. Divya, you go ahead.
So,
Divya, you speak first.
so with due respect, sir, can you go first, please?
Thank you. Sir, let me thank you, sir. I'm Siddharth Fudar. I'm a constitutional law teacher at the university. Sir, your lecture was very, very insightful. I am not an expert in international relations, but the way you have presented things, I think, sir, we are going to remember this for a long time. Sir, as far as your recommendation that India should stand at the margins and not try and play a lot of role. So on that point, I want to ask you, what about humanitarian funding that India has provided to Afghanistan for all this while? Should we be continuing that, or should we be tugging we should no longer be doing that? And so the second point that I want to ask is, all the money that we have spent so far on the dams and parliament buildings, do you think that has all gone in drain? That has gone waste? These are the 2 points I wanted to ask, sir. Thank you.
Sir, would you take more questions?
Let me respond to this question first.
Yes.
I think my submission would be that today there are n number of forces which are actually working in Afghanistan. There is no government also. So even if we want to craft a policy, we don't have very much choice left, right? Pakistan is not going to let you in. Let's be very clear. China is not going to be with you. Being one of the Security Council chairs, we have raised a voice within the United Nations as well. All right. So let me ask a counter question then. What exactly are India's interests at this point of time? The Indian interest is evacuate its own people, its own sympathizers, right? And come out at the earliest. Most of the engagements which you see, which you actually saw in the past few weeks, were primarily directed towards, right? Now coming to the part 2 of this story, which is, should we go ahead with humanitarian aid? Yes, obviously. But somebody has to take it, no? There is no government at this point of time. We are not sure as to how Taliban would behave. And we are also not sure today as to who is controlling the Taliban. So there is a dilemma here. Look at it from a policy maker's point of view. There is a dilemma here. And therefore, the best strategy for the for New Delhi would be to get in touch with their partners. I think there have been long telephonic conversations between the Russian president and the Prime Minister Modi. US is in touch with, the national security advisors are in touch with. And I think this is an evolving situation, and based on what exactly comes out and what type of government is there in Afghanistan is something. Whether India can actually diplomatically engage, whether India should, because there is a dilemma also, if Taliban is continues to be linked with militant organizations which are actually proscribed, then there is again a dilemma that you are negotiating with a government which is actually part of a banned entities list. So that's precisely why I said that there are not very many choices which are available at this point of time. And as I said, this is an evolving situation. 1 month down the line, things may change for good. We are also not sure whether Taliban is going to form a government. The type of resistance which it is facing, possibly it can lead to a civil war altogether. So it's in this context that I said that the wait and watch policy is best for us at this point.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, I have a question. Can I ask one question, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to ask. Sir, my question is, let's say there's an agreement between US and Taliban, right, in which Afghanistan was not a party even. So this agreement talks about we want to bring a peace in Afghanistan. At the same time, when Afghanistan is not a party for which they are actually entering into an agreement. So what is the future of, moreover, we call it as a non-state actor. As a terrorist group, we are calling them as a non-state actor. So how we are going to look for the sovereignty issue, one question, and second thing, how we are going to deal with the terrorism under the international law. Because if we start recognizing them, and the US or China or even India, if it's going to recognize them in future, so it means Taliban will be sitting in our United Nations Security Council's meeting later on in future. How we are looking for the international perspective to deal with the terrorism in future, if such kind of agreements are happening between a non-state actor group and the US or any other country for that matter, not considering the sovereignty of the country for whose benefit we are doing it. So I am so confused, sir. Please just put it like that. Thank you.
This is a question for which even I don't have an answer. Even the Americans don't have an answer. See, in the end, the Americans should have thought as to who they are negotiating with in Doha. Taliban was not a state. And most of the international law or the municipal law actually deals with state actors, not the non-state actors. And therefore, when these negotiations started, there was a lot of criticism even for United States. And exactly for the type of challenges which you have yourself mentioned. Who is going to sit in the Security Council? Who is going to sit in the United Nations? These are going to be some very important questions. That's precisely why I said the Taliban one government was recognized only by 3 actors. We will have to wait and see as to how many states are going to recognize Taliban. I am convinced that even United States is not going to recognize the Taliban government. Trust my words. It is going to be a major challenge. The Americans know their linkages with ISI, their linkages with Daesh, their linkages with ISIS. Can Americans go ahead and US, I presume it's a liberal democracy. Can you have a contrarian view as to what Taliban is doing against their own women in Afghanistan? How can the Americans defend it? So these are some of the major challenges. We'll have to see how Taliban has evolved. And today, what we see is that there is a massive gap between what Taliban spokesperson are saying in press and what is actually happening on ground. There is a huge gap. So no one has answers. So I think that's the only answer which I can give you for this question.
Sir, even US can't be trusted if Taliban can't be trusted. It's the same thing. And China cannot be trusted for that matter. And if politics comes into it, you can trust anyone. So that is the point. If we are going to support in future terrorist groups, so the future of international law itself is vanished by the countries itself, those who created it for the first time. They created international law to punish somebody, and now they are creating those people who should not be punished.
Forget the international law. I can extend this argument to multilateral institutions, where countries like China, Russia, US are sitting as permanent members of the Security Council with veto rights. So we also need to question those structures and institutions. But as I said, the world is changing. And that's precisely why I brought in the geopolitics of the region. There is a entirely new reconfiguration which is happening. And we will have to see as to how we play our foreign policy games and diplomacy within this new emerging international systemic which is evolving.
Isn't it going to pose a threat upon South Asia as well? Because if China is supporting and then Pakistan is going to support, if we don't support, then we will be like Taliban. If we support them, then it's fine. Isn't it going to be a pose a threat?
I said that it's going to be a major challenge for the region. I generally don't use the term South Asia. I always use India and its neighbors. Right? South Asia is, to me, an American discovery. That's how they define the world. But I always believe that India and its neighbors have a serious threat with the emergence of Taliban in the region.
Thank you. Divya wants to ask something, I think.
So given the serious threat and considering the geopolitics of the region, should India form a bloc with regional players like Russia, China, and Iran due to the convergence of interest for bringing a political settlement in the Afghanistan? And if yes, that we should form a bloc, then what are its implications on India?
Russia and Iran, yes, we are in touch with them. I think, but please understand that in this new configuration which is evolving, China is leading the world, backed by Pakistan, and the Russians and Iranians are also on their side. So I think it would be a folly to completely believe in them. Though we have a good working relationship with Iran and Russia.
What about the Uyghur Muslims? Like if the Taliban's come in configuration with Uyghur Muslims to help for their human rights. So I believe that China would help India and form a regional bloc to bring political stability.
See, this is not going to happen because Taliban is now going to run a country, right? Let's assume that they come to power and they are running a country. China, despite all pressures, has been able to manage the Uyghur problem, right? In fact, they have completely done away with the Uyghur rights within Xinjiang province. This is also a fact. See, who are we dealing with? China again is a totalitarian country. Please understand this, right? It is also a apprenticed power, right? Pakistan, given the fact that they are struggling for money, China is, but I think China is going to take the cards and Pakistan is likely to give the military and the intelligence support to them. China is wanting to be in a big way in Afghanistan.
So there are a lot of questions. We have to proceed very quickly. So Shashank Tripathi has been asking a question. He has asked a question a long time back. So let me read out. How should we see All India Muslim Personal Law Board praising the Talibani takeover? Also, how do such sentiments for Taliban within the Indian boundaries finding place in certain section of Indian society pose a stance worth considering in terms of security concerns?
See, I don't want to enter into the domestic politics. Yeah, but what I can say is, see, the Indian Muslims actually know that their interests lie with the interest of India. So whatever policy the government of the day takes, I think they will go by. So one thing is clear on that. Baki rest, one or two statements here and there don't matter too much.
Yeah, so some people have raised their hands. I'll unmute them. I think I can't. I think CCLG, you have to unmute Dhruv Bhatia.
Hi, sir. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, I can hear you.
So first of all, I would like to thank Professor Manish because this was a very informative and it's safe to say one of the best sessions I've been to yet on this issue. Now, my question basically, I have a lot of questions, right? So I'm going to choose the one that concerns me the most right now. So how much do you think will the probable influx of refugees into Jammu and Kashmir disrupt the goal of what the Modi government is trying to do with J&K right now?
No, I don't think there would be an influx of refugees in J&K, right? So that's not likely to happen.
Because if we look at the Middle East, for example, like you said, that the civil war is likely to break out in Afghanistan, right?
No, so in that case, the influx would be more into Pakistan. And Pakistan are going to extract the rent money also from Afghanistan. Don't worry about that. Pakistan is one country which can say appropriate anything. So from Taliban government, they will definitely extract the rent money for the refugees also.
Okay, so I just have one more question, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Please.
So do you believe that the fall of the Afghanistan government would have an effect on the Syrian war by giving ISIS a means of escape?
I'm not sure. To be very honest with you, I haven't thought about it. But yes, there is a Shia Sunni angle here, right? How is it going to unravel is something which I'm sorry I haven't thought about. So, but I'm sure they are not going to have, say, implications beyond South Asia. Please understand this. Because Afghanistan was primarily a concern of countries which actually border them, Iran, Pakistan, and the Central Asian region. So that was, and this is also a region wherein you see some of the major players like the US, Russia, China, with all their games. So I think that is something slightly far off from this particular region, and I don't see much of its implications in terms of conflict or violence. Right.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Next, Shreya Jain, please unmute her. Yes.
Firstly, thank you so much, sir, for this insightful session. So I wish to understand the complex relationship between Iran and the Talibani regime because, sir, given the fact that Iran under Ibrahim Raisi has publicly endorsed the Taliban regime, but sir, on the other hand, we see Iran being the savior of the Shia Muslims, at least that is what it portrays. And sir, the Hazara Muslims in Taliban, under the Taliban regime, under constant threat. So how do we understand the complex relationship between Iran and the Talibani regime?
I think this is something which you will have to understand from a state-to-state perspective for the time being. And since Iran shares borders with Pakistan and Afghanistan both, I think it is within that context that Iranians are going to play their games, right? So that's the only interest. I mean, every country generally wants to have its borders peaceful, all right? On the Balochistan, yeah, tell me.
Uh,
Right, yeah.
So because I read it that Saudi Arabia spread Wahhabism in Pakistan and Pakistan subsequently
Yes.
spread it to Afghanistan because of the 1971 Islamic Revolution of Iran under the Ayatollah regime. So, sir,
Yes.
Iran, the Talibanis actually went against the entire nexus of the Ayatollah regime. Now, the complete ironic
No,
thing.
no.
So,
I think don't go that far, right? In fact, on the Iranian border, which are the problems between Iran and Pakistan? Let me, since you brought in Saudi Arabia as well, Jundala, which is a major group which is active on the borders of Zahedan, right? So that's one of the problems. The Baluch rebellion, which is again a major problem, which is predominantly Pakistan, but spills over into Afghanistan. And since Jundula is again a sort of a Shia group, right? That is precisely why Iran would like to see its borders peaceful with Afghanistan. I mean, Jundula also is one of Pakistani ISI's creation. So the fact that ISI would be able to bring in all these elements together, Iran's limited interest would be to protect its border, right? The other aspects, I think the larger Shia aspect and all are more ideological in that nature.
okay, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Next part. Please unmute him. Yes, Parth. Your volume is low, so can't hear.
Is it better now?
Yes.
So, good morning, sir. First of all, thank you for the session. And my question is that one thing that we've seen quite clearly in the past few years is that Taliban is no longer the kind of monolithic group that it was under Muhammad Omar. And this time around, they've had to integrate a lot of regional militias and warlords. And they're also cooperating with a lot of other entities, both state like China and Pakistan, and non-state like the Haqqani network. So considering this, exactly how much control do the central Taliban leaders like Abdul Bardar and Hibatullah Akhundzada have over the rank and file of the Taliban?
See, I also mentioned in the presentation that Taliban is not a homogeneous entity. Nonetheless, the whole idea is, and there are factions, the warlords who have been fighting. I mean, just yesterday only you must have heard quarrels between Mullah Baradar and some other warlords. Haqqanis are primarily a creation of Pakistan's ISI. It was always there. Please understand this. It was fighting against the Soviets along with CIA in Afghanistan and subsequently was closely working with Taliban against the Americans, right? It generally is on the Waziristan border. They have a significant presence. And the term which the Americans at one point of time used to call the good Taliban and the bad Taliban, and the bad Taliban were primarily the Haqqanis, right? Who were basically attacking the American assets. Now, Haqqanis control the ISI, right? And precisely why my own speculation is that's one of the major, say, group which is now controlling the Kabul airport, right? Security is with them. Then there are many political leaders who have been, say, in Pakistani jail for now years. The one common thread which you have to remember, despite the fact that Taliban is not monolithic, but the one common factor which binds them is the ISI. Don't forget this, right? And precisely for this reason, you must have heard the news that ISI chief was in Afghanistan just a day back, right? Some pictures also came, right? what is the purpose? I think when it comes to formation of the government, the whole idea of ISI is to bring all these factions together, right, into one, say, umbrella, whatever be that umbrella look like, and also work on the leadership. So please understand the one common thread is ISI. This is what they have been doing with various groups who were operating in Afghanistan. They used to bring them together to fight against the Indian state. So this is a very old strategy of ISI. And that's precisely why ISI chief is there in Afghanistan.
Okay, there's so many questions, but anyway, there are 3 people more raising their hands. Please stop here. Only 3 people will take questions from them, and then maybe if sir has time, then we can read from the chat the questions. Okay. So Rachit Vijabat, please unmute him. Yeah. Yes, Rachit. Can't hear you. There's some problem with the sound. Okay, fix that. Meanwhile, we go to Pranit Singh. Please unmute Pranit.
Right, sir. Am I audible?
Yes.
I can hear you.
Yes. Thank you so much, sir. It was a very informational session, sir. Thank you so much for the session. Now, my question to you, sir, do you think that after these many examples that we've seen in the Middle East and the MENA region, for example, in the country of Yemen or in the country of Syria, where there is immense resistance to the government, say through rebels, through militias, where these countries are unable to just progress in any manner, do you think till the time there is resistance to Taliban, and then when Taliban, if say in a few years Taliban goes out and the new regime comes in, Taliban resisting this new regime, till this game goes on of resistance, do you think Afghanistan will ever make this kind of progress? And the follow-up question is, sir, Americans spent trillions of dollars building this economy of Afghanistan. And do you think Taliban would really want to work towards improving the economy and bringing in progress? Or what is the main motive over here, sir?
No, I think, unfortunately for Afghanistan, it's the beginning of dark years. Let me put it very simply and clearly. That's number one. Coming to your next question, I don't know. I mean, there is no government in Afghanistan. And therefore, we cannot speculate as to how the economic affairs of the government of Afghanistan would look like. Are they going to engage investment? Obviously, when it comes to China, they have asked China to come and invest. But I think with the Americans and the rest of the Western world, they would still be wary. Since they are going for a sort of Islamic Republic of, not Emirate of Afghanistan, right? Obviously, they will try to exploit the Sharia rules when it comes to economic engagements with the rest of the world. So that's what I can say at this point.
Right, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Last person to be unmuted, Purnima.
So firstly, I would like to appreciate the whole lecture. It was absolutely enriching. My question is regarding your opinion, which is going on in these days in the market, that America has withdrawn intentionally in order to destabilize this region intentionally, so that there can be armed conflicts and it can sell its weapon. It can sell its weapons. So what do you think? What was the, except the domestic criticism which it was facing due to the casualties of US Army, what could be the another reason for the withdrawal of America in such a manner that they have even left all their equipments over there in hands of Taliban?
No,
So
I
what
think
is your opinion on this?
I'll answer. I think we don't have to go into a lot of conspiracy theories. I mean, there are other vendors also who may be wanting to sell their arms in Afghanistan, right?
Yes.
But the Americans may have done their own cost benefit given their national interest. And my own sense is that this war was actually overstretching for the Americans, right? Now, having stability in Afghanistan is not what the Americans would want. That's not their core objective. Their core objective was, why they came into Afghanistan was because they wanted to eliminate Osama bin Laden, who was thought to be one of the perpetrators of 9/11. That was their limited objective, right? And I think they have achieved that objective. And given the domestic pressures, Americans have withdrawn. Beyond that, I don't read much of conspiracy theory here. But it's right. I mean, any conflict area is something which actually invites a lot of vendors from all, say, and arms dealers. They may be Russians, they may be Chinese, they may be Pakistanis, right? But it's for Taliban to deal and engage.
And sir, I have one more question. I have read the Doha Agreement between US and Taliban, and the condition to withdraw was that they won't indulge into terrorist groups like Al Qaeda. And now we can see that per se Taliban is violating its obligations under Doha Agreement. So, do you think that America can take action, or it will take action again in future if they don't say true to their terms, Taliban?
See, I think throughout my presentation, I kept on stressing this point that there is a huge gap between the promises made by Taliban and what the situation is actually on ground.
Yes, yes,
right.
sir.
Throughout my lecture, I have stressed this point. So I may not be surprised if they have signed an agreement which says something and what they are doing is something else. Right. Now, the international community can always come together through the United Nations, through other, say, coalitions to help Afghanistan. But I think most of the countries are now wanting to see as to how situation evolves. It's too early to predict. Right? It's just starting from 15th August. It's hardly, say, how many, not even a month, right? So I think most of the countries are doing their own cost benefit. And I think if situation worsens, then there is an international body which can always pitch in.
So right now we can just wait and watch.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, sir. I'm
yeah.
absolutely obliged.
Rachit, if your audio is fixed, you can ask quickly your question.
Good afternoon, sir. Am I audible now?
Yeah, I can hear you. Good afternoon.
Sir, as you said that ISI is playing a major role of what is happening in Afghanistan. So what do you think should our intelligence agency should do to settle what's happening in Afghanistan?
I think intelligence agencies are not going to ask us as to what they are doing. And obviously, we'll never able to come to know as to what they have done, right? And as I said, from a policy point of view, we are absolutely clear. We are actually monitoring the situation there. We are in diplomatic, touch with some of the major powers, and we are doing a sort of a cost-benefit analysis. In fact, about ISI also, the issues which I spoke are primarily in the open source domain, right? These are literatures which have been written by not just Indian scholars, but the American scholars themselves, right? There is a very nice book by Christine Fair on Lashkar, on Pak Army, and you can see as to how ISI plays its Hussein Haqqani's writings, right? So there are a lot of writings about how, and on the origin of Taliban also. I mean, they're wonderful books. So you can read those books and see as to what ISI has done to create and why it did what it did. So I'm primarily referring some of these open sources in literature throughout my talk.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
So yeah, Sorry, should we stop, or there are a few questions in the chat also?
Very quickly, if there are one or two questions we can take, huh?
Yeah, one or two questions which have not been addressed, like on the resistance to Taliban, Nitam Kuli is asking. So will it be effective?
I don't know, because Panjshir is the only place where you see some resistance to Taliban in a very organized way. There are sporadic protests across Afghanistan, but even, and I'm sure there must be some negotiations on between, say, the militia in Panjshir and the Taliban as well. So it's too early to predict, as I say. But Panjshir has always given a resistance. They are giving a resistance to Taliban. And even if they don't accept their supremacy, at least 85% of the Afghan territory is under the control of Taliban. So let us also accept this fact.
So Yuvraj Mathur is asking about the policies of the Middle Eastern governments. Will it change after this?
Not exactly.
So as per the latest update, Panjshir is already gone. Like the Taliban just declared, recently it declared that they have taken over Panjshir as well. So it's a recent update.
There is a lot of information warfare also happening. So if there is a video which comes out of Panjshir, obviously Taliban also will release something or the other. So this is part of a strategy, psyops and information warfare, which goes in a conflict area. So from yesterday, we have been hearing that Taliban has taken over. We have also been hearing from the other group. So let's wait for this situation to come up. Panjshir is not an easy cake for Taliban. Please understand this.
Yeah. So will it affect the international status of US, the withdrawal?
No, not exactly. US is too big to deal with, and Afghanistan is too small for Americans.
Ishan Jain is asking about Taliban India talks that have gone. Will it lead to something?
No, we haven't engaged in any talks as such.
Like some statements have been made by Taliban leaders.
Those were statements. We haven't diplomatically recognized Taliban. There have been some engagements related to withdrawal of Indian nations. That is it, right? So there is a difference between a negotiation and engagements and talks here and there, right?
So the last question I would like.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Please. Please conclude this. And then
No, please go ahead.
So last question is by Chirag Garg. What about the reaction of Afghan society to Taliban?
See, the fact that women have come out and there is a resistance to Taliban speaks quite a bit about Afghani society. They are not very happy about what Taliban have been doing with them, right? In the 70s, look at the status of women. Go to Kabul University, and if you can just sift through some of the internet and look as to how Kabul University looked like in the 70s, I think it was absolutely a westernized world, a liberal. The girls used to go to universities, colleges everywhere. The subsequent phase where you saw a lot of Islamic laws, the Taliban and women in burqa, that's altogether a very different and a sad story. And as I said, I have n number of students here in India. Many of them are in touch with us. They have taught them, and they are not happy. They actually talk with a lot of desperation. I mean, it looks like they don't have much choice. And some of the students who are actually, say, of second semester, and now that the universities are reopening, are now running back and forth to the Indian mission just to come out of Afghanistan. So it's not a very, I would say, it's not a very happy situation for the people of Afghanistan.
Right.
But that's how, I mean, we can feel sorry about it, but we all are slightly helpless about it.
Thank you, sir, for covering so many aspects of this issue. Now I'd request Divya to offer a vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, sir, for this enlightening session. We at Constitutional Law and Governance Center, with all our hearts open, thank you for this enlightening session and all the responses that we got. Actually, we did not have much reference about the Afghanistan and the situation the Taliban is creating in Afghanistan, even on YouTube. And I believe that this would actually create a new discourse even on YouTube, because we will be sharing this very discourse on YouTube itself. And I believe that we ourselves will be writing something or some research paper about the same problem, given your new views and your perspective to this topic. So thank you so much for this enlightening